Hello, my name is Ryan Sclar. I'm with the Urban and Regional Planning Department at UCLA, and today I'd like to talk about CEQA. CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act, is not necessarily something that's a household item of discussion amongst residents of California, but I'd like to make the argument that perhaps maybe it should be. Essentially what CEQA is a law requiring that any project that may have a environmental impact be analyzed, and those environmental impacts should be disclosed to the public. So essentially, CEQA is intended to inform the public about any type of environmental impacts that a project may have. This was spurred on by a wave of environmental movements and acts in the late 1960s and continuing into the 70s. CEQA itself was passed in 1970, which was the same year that NEPA was passed, NEPA being the federal equivalent of CEQA. Now, CEQA is not specifically unique. It is one of about 19 or so other regulatory acts in states that are very similar. But the one thing that does make CEQA special amongst them all is that it is most arguably the strictest such act in the nation. So CEQA, in addition to looking at things which are very explicitly environmental issues, such as air quality and the placement of hazardous materials and impacts on water quality, it also looks at things which are not so explicitly environmental issues, such as the impact that a project might have on recreation or on aesthetics or noise or even just historical buildings. So CEQA is quite comprehensive. There are three main elements of CEQA. The first one is just determining whether or not what you have is a project. Seems simple enough, but the definition that CEQA uses for the term project is actually quite liberally defined. So for example, something as innocuous as having a city approve a variance can be determined to be a project under the CEQA definition. Assuming you do have a project, then there are some levels of exemption which you may be subject to. You're exempt from CEQA if you fulfill any type of statutory reason written by the Congress, or if you have a categorical reason, or simply if you just don't have any environmental impacts that your project is going to create. But the big problem is that you need to be able to prove that you meet these exceptions, and that's very difficult to do. If you do get sued, the burden of proof will lie on you as the lead agency proposing the project. So the burden of proof goes to the person who is proving who wants the project, which can be very burdensome to the project, and it's very difficult to get exemptions as a result of this. Assuming you have a project that is not subject to an exemption, you're either going to need to file, amongst many others, but the three major ones are the negative declaration, which is essentially saying, I can't qualify for an exemption, but I don't believe I'm making any significant environmental impacts. There's a mitigated negative declaration, which says, well, I have a couple small environmental impacts, but I do believe I'm going to be able to mitigate them, and this document will explain exactly how I believe I will. And then, if you don't have either of those, as most meaningful and impactful projects in the state of California don't, then you're going to be subject to what is called an Environmental Impact Report, more commonly known as an EIR. And the major issue that many people have with EIRs is that they are incredibly expensive and they take a long time to produce. This wasn't necessarily the case in the 1970s when CEQA was introduced. EIRs used to be 100 or so pages of readable text that was easily accessible to the layman and the common reader. But what's happened over the years is that basically the EIR process has been hijacked, most arguably, by lawsuits and by a regulatory one-way ratchet, to the point right now where you're producing thousands, if not tens of thousands of pages per EIR filled with legalese, essentially just in the hopes that your document will not be able to be sued and that you're covering all of the requirements for the EIR. So these things can cost upwards of millions of dollars to produce. They can take a long time, and even when you do finish an EIR, it can still be open to years of litigation while people are trying to sue and find holes in your EIR. As a result, there have been some significant attempts to reform CEQA, both sides of the aisle. So the governor of California has been very involved, as well as some of the Republicans on the opposite side of the spectrum. And there's also been some attempts to simply just bypass CEQA. There was an influential court case which was recently ruled, named Tuliman Jobs and Small Businesses Alliance versus the Superior Court. And essentially what this case ruled was that projects that are pushed forward through voter initiatives are not subject to CEQA. So there might be some very large potential impacts of that law. Time will have to tell. The point of me making this video is not to provide a scathing review of CEQA. It's not to speak particularly negative about the process, but it's simply just to inform people that in CEQA's quest to unveil the impact of projects, it has essentially left an impact of its own. Thank you.